Good morning, and well, welcome to the October edition of the Prajnya Gender Talks. I'm not sure whether we should invite Dr. Asha Hans because we consider her to be part of our team and our community anyway, and we partner with Sansristi and SMRC so much. Nevertheless, it's my privilege to welcome my friend and my colleague, Dr. Asha Hans, to this series for the first time. And I've had a chance to read her writing on many different topics, and gender climate change is one of them. Asha actually is somebody who works on that spectrum of security and peace issues that feminists define. I mean, others look at this part of it or that part of it, but from the feminist perspective, it's all in a basket, on a continuum, all connected to each other. So you can read her work on disarmament, and you can read her work on Kashmir or Manipur. You can read her work on disasters, and you can read her work on climate change. And all of that, she's an activist and an academic, or an academic and an activist, or an activist and an academic. The two lives intertwine so much you can't really tell them apart. She is also the moving force behind two important Bhubaneswar organizations, both of which I'm proud that Prajnya is associated with. Sansristi, which is 25, and the Shanta Memorial Rehabilitation Centre. Now I will read her formal bio out. Dr. Asha Hans is the founder of Sansristi and the executive vice president of the Shanta Memorial Rehabilitation Centre. She has had a long and illustrious academic career at Utkal University and has published prolifically on topics in international relations and South Asian politics. She has been a long-standing and active member of the Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy, as well as other civil society organizations. Dr. Hans' most recent publication is Engendering Climate Change, Lessons from South Asia, published by Routledge earlier this year, which she co-edited with Nitya Rao, Anjal, Prakash, and Amrita Patel, whom we miss very much. We are so privileged to be able to listen to you talk on this topic because the number of people who work at this intersection is really small, and you are one of them. And I think to be able to listen to someone talk about climate change and gender, but also from a securitization point of view is a great privilege. So thank you, Asha, and welcome to you, and over to you.
Thank you, Swarna. It's a privilege to be part of Prajnya and be talking today. At so many forums we've got together, and especially I remember our book on openings for peace, which you did not mention, but which is one of our best books on 1325 from the South Asian context and on peace and security. I think this learnings from peace and security and my stint at the UN Women Humanitarian Fund made me realize that one of the issues that we were still missing is that of climate change, which I had done a book on, but still, it did not have that anything to do with the security part from the international relations perspective. And that is something that very little has been done. There's enough written on it from a general perspective, but from gender, there are only 2 or 3 women who do that. So that is one of the reasons, but there are 2 other reasons which made me go into this. And these 2 are something that have been worrying me for the last 1 year. The first is that there is a comeback, a new version of colonialism that we are seeing. And the second is that of the strengthening of militarization, which many of us have been fighting against, that it should be stopped. But that is another thing that is strengthening. Now, how is that happening and why is it happening is something that I look at it from a very, I cannot do it at an in-depth perception in this half an hour, but I think we can get an idea of what it is and what we need to do. First of all, about the climate change, we have to look at the frameworks. What kind of frameworks do we work in? Where climate change is concerned, you have the UNFCCC, which is the framework, the convention, where we talk about climate change, and which all the states have to negotiate. That is the space for negotiation. The next one, of course, is coming next month in Scotland. But the two important ones that took place earlier was one at Kyoto and more recently one in Paris in 2015, which laid down the barrier that it should be that where climate change is concerned, 2% should be the barrier, and above that it can have a devastating effect on people. Now, where UNFCCC is concerned, gender seemed to be missing. Only it was in 2014 at the Lima COP that they decided, Conference of Parties, that it was decided that gender was important. But after that, you know how these organizations work. Gender is important, but it still remains on the edge. So also in UNFCCC, this is what has happened. So whatever happens in climate change, whether it is coastal erosion, whether it's wildfires, or whether it is mountains losing ice, all of them, gender seems to be missing. Unless you look at books like what Nitya and I and Anjal did with Amrita earlier this year on engendering climate change. But that was not international politics. It was basically on the ground what is happening. But if what's on the ground is happening does not get reflected in the conventions and at the international level, then that means that they're missing out gender completely, because there are no voices, there are no women who can talk about it. And most of these that we looked at, for example, Nitya Rao and I did the Mahanadi Delta, and we found that there was coastal erosion in Mahanadi Delta, which led to a huge number of villages getting wiped out. They no longer exist. Now, that means people who are displaced, if they are displaced, there is migration. If you look at the northern countries and they hear the word migration, it sets out a complete new barrier where people should not move as far as possible and stay within their own households. But that is not how it happens. Migration does take place because people are forced to move. They have no livelihood. Food insecurity becomes an issue. And that is one reason why climate change is so important to study and to know about it. The other silo, as I call it, is the WPS, the Women at Peace and Security that you, Swarna and I have been working on and talking about. You barely see climate change in it. When 1325 came, it had four very good pillars, but climate change was not one of the issues that was highlighted. It was only in 2015 again, when Paris COP came, that it was decided that a new resolution called 2242 came in, part of the 1325, the WPS whole composite agenda, which provides, I'd like to say two sentences here about 1325 and the agenda of women, peace and security, that for the first time in the Security Council, a resolution was passed unanimously on women, peace and security. And that has now extended by 9 other resolutions. Some of you here today have worked extensively on it. Swarna and I did a book on it, but more on India, looking at it. Now, these two agendas, therefore, are separate. You have the climate change agenda and you have a women, peace and security agenda. 2242 also had one paragraph on it. And most of the emphasis was on extremism, on terrorism, not on anything else. So you can understand how it's still not mainstream, it's still not part of the where we would like women, peace and security to be situated. Now, in these two things that we have looked at and the silos that are there, the issues confronting us that I have observed in some of the readings recently, the first, as I said, was that of colonialism. And that is happening in places like the Arctic. If you look at the Arctic, where there is snow melting, it has given rise to a number of issues. One is that if you remember your international relations, you will also remember the role of Suez Canal in increase of colonialism. That is, Suez Canal cut short the way to countries like India, and where then resources extraction politics became very important. People could extract everything that they wanted, whether it was minerals or spices, whatever, or gold, and take it easily back to Europe. In the same way now, with the melting of the Arctic, it is shortening the space to other areas. That is one part. The second part is that if you look at the map today of the Arctic, you will see that it is divided. These are not countries. It is divided by countries, the Security Council members. The United States is there, China is there, Russia is there, even Norway is there, and of course Canada was there earlier, where part of that continent lies. They have divided a country where they can access resources. The resources of the Arctic is not only fish, it is oil, it is minerals. All these resources now have been divided by the countries among themselves. What happens when that kind of colonialism comes up? It is the women who finally suffer. And one of the group of women, I think, which the WPS agenda needs to look at, not only in the Arctic, but across the globe, is the indigenous women, the Adivasi, the tribal women, who are suffering across the globe because of the extraction politics that is being devised by countries who want to, it's a kind of imperialism which is still continuing, a colonialism which is still continuing. And I think the Arctic is now focused on that, and it has already affected the women from the Arctic. And as it is affecting women here, where I live in Odisha, where all the mines are where tribal areas are concerned. So 80% of the world's resources are looked after, are consolidated by women across the globe. Now, if that is not an agenda that women, peace and security should look at, because there is so much violence against them, then I do not know what other issue we should be looking at. So this is a primary goal. The second goal that has come and which has been increasing tremendously has came up, I think it was in the 1980s, but basically in 2007 and 8, it was countries like United States, all the Security Council countries who were there, who started a new agenda of saying that climate change is affecting their defense. So they had bases all over the world, which are now coming underwater because some of the smaller islands were also coming underwater because of the sea surge. The sea had gone up because of the heating of the sea, the acidification of oceans. There were storm surges. In fact, one of the women whom I met in the Mahanadi Delta, and I asked her, I said, you have shifted from that village because it no longer exists. What is it you are happy about? She said, that sound of the sea surge. The tremendous sound of the sea surge which hit us all the time listening to it. So you see, these are the kind of things that the United States budgets are going up because climate change means that their bases should be taken care of and more money is needed, whether it's within the country or outside the country, in Marshall Islands, in Guam. The same thing is happening to other countries like Russia, China, and the Pacific Ocean also. The amount of money that is being spent and because of the basis that it has, or some of the areas like Southeast Asia, which is interested in. So these are something that we don't look at militarization. We know that money is being spent, huge amount of money on militarization. We have always fought against it. We have said that if you have militarization, you do not spend enough on health, you do not spend enough on livelihood. And the pandemic showed us that what has happened, that the cost of health was so low that there were no rooms available in hospitals. Poor people could not afford them. There was no oxygen. So these are the kind of things that happened with militarization. And now you have a new kind of strengthening of the militarization process. And the key word is climate change. Every country is coming up with increase in budgets because they think that climate change is affecting them. And that is another reason why it should be done. And we know that since climate change affects women, militarization affects women, specifically in all conflict region and outside conflict region, it is something that we need to be aware of. And it is something that we need to talk about. It's something that we should be dealing with. Because in 1325, countries have to give a national action plan where they say what they're doing about the women, peace and security. India, of course, doesn't have a national action plan because we don't believe that there are conflict regions. Out of 1 out of 4, I think, of the countries who have NAPs had used climate change as an issue. Among them, the only 3 countries which gave extensive work was Ireland, Finland, and the United States. The rest have mentioned. Italy, I know, has mentioned. A number of others have just mentioned. Now, before us, there are certain issues that come up. How do we go about it? How do we move forward? Beside our writings, we are academics, most of us, in our work that we do on conflict. That is something that again is an issue. And there is another, beside women, peace and security, which for the first time was included in the Security Council, there is also CEDAW, which most of the people who are here today will know. CEDAW has had a number of recommendations on women, peace and security, and also on climate change. The only problem is, though it is mandatory for states to follow, very few states follow what CEDAW says in reality or implement it. So the problems before us, as we see in terms of how the world is going to change and how we can, what our input can be in terms of women, peace and security, is that we can highlight these issues, but how do we go about where we change the mindset of people, the mindset of not only people but of countries. I will end up with, there were some other thing that I wanted to say, but yesterday, day before yesterday, a friend of mine sent me a beautiful speech by a woman from Barbados, the Prime Minister of Barbados, at the General Assembly, which has now become viral, so most of you can see it. It is by someone called Mia Amor Motley. It has been shared by the government of Barbados, and it's, you can see. It reminded me of, if you remember that song by Bob Dylan, Blowing in the Wind, the way she talks of how she was in the General Assembly, a General Assembly which was really empty. And she made it a point. She said it's not only empty, but the people who are there are not leaders. They are the bureaucrats who are representing states. So, you know, the importance of the United Nations has become so limited that no one takes it seriously at all. And that has been one of the greatest barriers in our ways of looking at women, peace and security. If you don't believe in an organization, you lose trust in it, then where do we go from there? So she said, I'll end with this. Who will stand up in the name of all those millions who have died because of the climate crisis? Who will stand up for the small island developing states who need 1.5 degrees to survive as we go to COP26? That's the one in Scotland that will take place. Who will stand up, not with a little token, but with real progress? How many more hurricanes must destroy, locusts devour, and islands be submerged before we realize that $100 billion in climate finance are simply not enough? No one wants to pay for it. The answer is that we are waiting for urgent global moral strategic leadership. How many more crises must hit before we see an international system that stops dividing and starts to lift us up? How many more times must we speak about the plight of the people of countries like Cuba and Haiti and see very little being done to lift the floor of social development, to give them the right to pursue their legitimate aspirations? How many more crises and natural disasters before we see that assistance does not reach those who need it most and those who are most vulnerable? How many more times must we stand idly by and see women of color and men of color and women be attacked disproportionately when the leadership of the international organizations? Yes, how many times must great needs be met simply by nice words and not the goodwill that is necessary to prevent nationalism and militarism? The answer is that we have the means to invest in protecting the most vulnerable on our climate from a changing climate, but we chose not to. It is not because we do not have enough. It is because we do not have the will to distribute that which we have. It is also, regrettably, the faceless few who do not fear the consequences sufficiently. You know, this in itself, this para, gives you the whole idea of climate change and how the world is moving on it, and the kind of dangers that we are facing in the context of women who have been affected by climate change, who have lost homes, who have lost livelihoods, whose husbands have migrated, and there are women-headed households increasing. So these are the kind of things I think that we need to look at and perhaps put it on our agendas of women, peace, and security. Thank you. I think I did it right, 20 minutes. Thank you, sir.
We actually don't watch the clock in this series because everywhere else that you get invited to speak, you get absurdly short times. 1 hour session with 8 speakers, each of whom has to tell the truth about her field. We are now open for questions and comments, which you can drop in the chat box. Since we have 31 people and I will not see everyone's hands raised, but I will actually start by asking you the question that has no answer. And, which is really about the third term in your title, securitization. And all of us wrestle with using it. It is a speech act, using it to draw attention to the issues we work on, whether it is the climate crisis or it is gender-based violence. But then, the trade-off of that is the loss of civil liberties, the appropriation of the right to decision-making by a few, and so on. So how, in the case of climate crisis, which is pressing, urgent, we can all experience it every day now, it's no longer a theoretical matter. How do we calibrate that trade-off? How do we decide how much of our freedom and our agency we give up in order to get the enhanced attention, priority, and resources that the crisis requires.
Thanks, Swarna. I was hoping someone would bring up that issue because putting it in the title was also to draw attention to the fact that that is what states are doing, that's what nations are doing, that under the name of securitization, they have tried to bring in the women, peace and security issue, that we are providing you security, and when we provide you security, this is what this nation state should do. Forgetting that each nation state, even however they say that they are sovereign, are still really not sovereign, because we are a world which is totally linked to each other. In fact, the word was used by Oswald Spring. She writes on human security, and one of the words she uses, she says she likes to use the word securitization, which I, to some extent, disagree with, because I think it is too narrow a term to make it where women, peace and security are concerned. It has to, what we need to bring about terminologies which are broader. And some of us have been using the word human security, because I feel that human security is a much better terminology, and it has a future. It does not limit us, bound us to states. Human security is something that we as women can do, because there are many, of course, definitions of human security. One that we use mostly among the feminist scholars is that human security looks for basic needs. That is important. It looks for our dignity, supports our dignity. It sees that physical security or physical protection is provided to us, and that where we are concerned, the environment is also provided, that it is secure. So these are the four things of human security, which I think are much more broader and much better than using the word securitization. Gender, peace, and human security would have made a better heading, but the idea of whether we should use the term securitization or not is something that needs to be discussed. It has just started. Some people are using it, but I think we are using it without thinking. I think we need to think. We need to bring attention to it and make it, maybe define it in a better way. Does that answer your question? Or
partially, but as you know, I mean, as I said, this is not really a question. So as you were talking, I'm also thinking about those stretches of northern Sri Lanka where the military has taken over beachfront properties and is developing them. And I think that sort of land acquisition and displacement will also follow in the name of protecting ecologically at-risk areas and so on. And then afterwards, what happens is something that people lose control over. So, as with all matters relating to citizenship and security, we're looking at being more and more vigilant. There is a question in the chat box from Radhika Modi, and I'm so happy to see you here, Radhika. Has there been a study trying to understand the impact of climate on trans women globally? There's some literature on the impact of militarization on trans individuals, but not sure about climate.
See, I don't think that climate or militarization may, but climate differentiates between people. To that extent, it affects everyone. It affects some more than others. And in that context, like I cannot answer for trans women, but I am doing a study on women with disabilities. And so when we look at that, they are on an equal basis where trans women are concerned, because they are also not only women suffer disproportionately, they suffer much more. In that way, I think there is a study done on trans women and militarization. I was looking at it a few days ago, and some people have looked at it because in some societies, it is the culture which also becomes a barrier for women who, unless you treat them as you look at us as binaries, then it becomes a problematic. And I think it should be a very important study, but getting women on the ground in conflict zones, I don't know how far that is easy, but UN Women have a humanitarian fund where I was on the board. They have about 40, I think, climate change, and they have 40 conflict zones which they are working on, or providing money to grassroots women. I think they should be able to get something some information from off the ground, because stretching across the whole of the world, mostly in Africa, Middle East, but also Asia, and looking at conflict women, this should become a easier way of looking at things. I could get you in touch with them if you would like that to bring up that issue.
Shamita asks, could you please discuss some regional, sub-regional responses? What's the scope, value of these responses, particularly in view of the lack of international consensus on this matter?
See, when the WPS agenda was India, as you know, doesn't agree to 1325, but it does take on debates in the Security Council on WPS. When the issue of climate change was brought in, the Indian government refused. They said that climate change in WPS is not a place to be taken up within the Security Council. If you want to do that, you have to go to the UNFCCC. In the same way, Russia also has said that we cannot allow the Security Council to be used and the WPS platform to be used for climate change. You have to move on. The only country, I think it was in 2007, that the United Kingdom brought the issue to the Security Council. But the United States has agreed with it, of course, but countries like India, Russia, China is shifting. It's still on the border. It has been against it, but now it's shifting forward. So let's see what steps they take. But where Bangladesh is concerned, there has been some work on Bangladesh, what I have done through the UN Women, where peace and security and conflict are concerned. Because some areas of climate change are also areas of conflict and high areas of poverty. Now, there are cross-cutting intersections that we have to look at, and this is one of the intersectionalities, I think, which we would have to look at. And Bangladesh is a good example, where I remember someone even did a mapping of that. I've seen that in India, of course, when I worked on the coastal erosion. I'll give you one example which comes to my mind, which Nitya and others have sort of brought it out in case of arid zones. And they did a study in Africa, but the one they did in South India, they talked about bore wells. The amount of bore wells that are being dug led to a lot of the eradication of poverty in the first stage. But when that water finished and they dug the second well, the third well, the poverty increased. And you know, with that change, not only poverty increased, gender roles changed completely. Who are the water carriers? Who should water began to be priced? That was one thing. The other thing, because it came in tankers, men had to go and fetch it. So our old notions that women are the water carriers also went out of the window. So I think climate change is not easy, because you have to look at it from what happens when the mountains melt and there's flooding. You have to look at it from a different perspective of what happens when there are, for example, what I did in deltas. You have to look at it from semi-arid zone, the Sahel, for example. You look at it in India, everywhere there is drought. Even in Odisha, we have drought. There are different kinds, but the biggest problem is still migration, huge amount of migration, but still, we don't call them climate refugees. That is still something that the international community does not want. And this is not new. It has been there on the agenda. I don't know. I think I started working on a long time back, 20 years ago or 15 years, that climate refugees came up, and still no one will wants that.
Actually, from the foreign policy point of view or the international relations point of view, interests within India itself are so diverse on the question of climate change, leave alone the region. I mean, it's impossible to be on the same side of the issue across the region. Inevitably, there are people who are more critically affected, and then there are countries that have enough room. You can escape one acute impact and shift somewhere and then escape the next one. And there's enough room for maneuver within large countries. But I think that this is sort of a long-term, talking about security, a long-term issue that we don't think enough about. Sujata Modi asks, there are huge asymmetries in consumption and carbon footprints within the country. Are these being documented? Are there such tools to look at who's hastening climate change? There is such economic disparity. How does this differentially impact different sections of people?
I think I'll go back to the international first. One of the things is that the UNFCCC tells us how to look at climate change and how to measure it, and who's responsible, that it is our responsibility. One of the things that has been taught in by countries of the South, including India, that it is not what you are using, it's not the carbon footprints of today. It has a historical end to it also. Who has used it historically much more, and what has been the impact on people across the globe? So that historical contribution is something that the southern countries are now saying should be taken into account. And that is where that 100 billion, what she was talking about, the Barbados Prime Minister, made sense, because she was from a southern country and saying that you have messed up the climate across the globe. We have not contributed to it, but yet this amount that you are giving is not enough to do away with it. In the same way, where gender is concerned in countries like India, this issue has come up on many platforms, that are women responsible? Why should we bear the brunt of climate change, going further to get wood or going further to get water, going without livelihoods, are men migrating, when we were not responsible, first of all, for the climate change that is taking place, the emissions that are taking place? Because if the emissions continue, if it becomes even 4, then conflicts, there have been too many predictions, in fact, which say that about 25% more of, 25 times more of conflict will increase in the world. So inside India also, who's responsible for climate change is an issue that is coming up again and again, brought out by women at many platforms, that please, those who are responsible, remove those footprints, stop the emissions and make the changes. But a lot of adaptation work women cannot do. A lot of it has to do with mitigation also, is because they don't have the capacity. So a lot of capacity building is needed of people, whether they are women or intersectionalities of disability or transgender, whatever it is.
Any other questions? I mean, Kanal, Mariam?
I think we had a lot for a first discussion on climate change. But I hope some of the younger people who are here will take up the issue and write some blogs, at least for Prajnya, on this.
Okay, she said that. I didn't.
I said that because it helped me to put my thoughts straight also. And I share the paper I wrote. It's a rough draft, but I will for anyone who needs it.
Sujata's later message says she's looking at the local perspective and wondering if we can talk about this within our country.
Oh, okay. Oh, but what is the local response? Because one of the things lots of people are doing on climate change, action-oriented, on the ground, and a lot of work is being done by women on the ground because it's natural, because they are also, the natural resources are under their control. It's not only indigenous women, but it's also natural resources, whether it's water, whether it's the forest, protecting all of them have been women's work. So naturally, these have become the places where people have started to bring together women, and women have come together to speak about the issues and try to promote that this is what we want. If today there is more forestation, there is more mangrove growing, these are things that women have also moved these agendas. It's not only that they have come, they don't come from the state. Most of the time it is people, it's people's voices that count and people who have been saying. And on the whole, it has been a positive approach. It's not a blame game thing, which is good, because people are moving together on a line where, you know, the state and the people to some extent come together, but not enough. The state can do much, much more. And one of the things, of course, is that the money that also is too limited. There are some states which have, I know Odisha has a national state action plan. Everyone has, but they also have a cell. But how much of it, they also put gender into it because Amrita and I push them to do it. But how many of them really, you know, look at our budgets. If I talked about militarization and I said so much budgets are going up because of climate change, look at how much budget is going up on climate change. You'll know from there. Our capacity is the what we work, how we work also depends a lot on the state support that comes with money. That is something. Also giving voice to women at different platforms. That is needed.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, we are much better at budget allocations, adequate or inadequate, than we are at actually making substantial changes. Sujata, I want to invite you to tell us a little bit about domestic violence, domestic workers and climate change, because I think it's an important thing. And as I read your question, in my mind, I'm also making international linkages, because domestic workers are one of the invisible international flows that mainstream scholars don't think about. But I want to invite you to pop in and say something. So would you unmute?
Can you hear me? Yeah, so I have not done any perceptible work on climate change.
But just experience.
But when I go to working class communities, something that really hits the eye is their lives which are very minimal consumption. very little plastic, very little, market-driven kind of consumables. Many of them, in fact, are on relocation sites where they have put in labor to improve their lives, to plant trees or, so just to all this, but there's so much labor in their lives and so little consumption. I keep thinking that domestic workers, in fact, I see them as people who are actually climate warriors. These to use such words. Because they're effectively using technology and so on. We are recognizing they are actually in a very large way, and we ask them very little. So I sort of thought it's a key agenda where we look sections, look at the, say, the garment workers who are producing for the West on the supply line chains. So literally every section of women workers in third world countries are actually working to protect the environment, reduce the carbon footprint, and someone is actually exploiting that. So if we don't actually say, it's not that they're just refugees or whatever they are, they've actually worked to save the climate. So they have definitely a positive contribution, which nobody is recognizing. And this is something that I thought, is it possible to document it? Something just came to my mind.
I think it's actually a really good topic to document. I hope some foundation listening to this picks it up, because then the other linkage that I'm making is to climate change impact on habitation areas, livelihoods, land, and then the necessity, how it necessitates not just displacement, but also the search to go abroad to do domestic work or any other kind of construction work or other things, which in some countries like Sri Lanka are regulated and documented and somewhat protected, but not quite the same in India. So what happens when these women travel abroad and send remittances? How does that change the gender relations here, starting from climate change, but linking to that chain of consequences as well? So I'm also thinking aloud as I speak, but I hope someone watches this and says, oh, this would be a really good thing to fund. Asha, do you want to say something? And then I'll read the next question.
Thinking that, in fact, some of us have just written a proposal on weavers. I've done some work for ILO on garment workers in Tirupur and Bangalore, and seen their conditions, which is a real violation of human rights in every way. But we are also bringing up the issue of weavers because they undergo a lot of problem because of the dyes, etc., as you mentioned, and that is something that needs to be looked at. But I was bringing up another issue was also when you mentioned relocation. One of the things that the government has done in the Mahanadi Delta, where 7 villages in a place called Satpaya have disappeared, they have relocated these women. But relocation meant that they gave them part of the NREGA, they gave land, which was really bad land, in the sense that they could not even grow anything, not a kitchen garden. But they also had to build it themselves under NREGA. So, relocation for these women who had left behind all their cattle, their food, the house, everything, this was relocation. So, this is something that need to be changed in terms of human rights also. And remittances, of course, lots of people do go because it's important to, if you go abroad, you get much more than you would get within the country itself. And but there's a lot of competition between countries, especially neighboring countries with us, where women are concerned. And COVID has given a new, completely changed the whole way that we look at things.
Rajapandian T asks, present Biden administration has been pursuing energy justice as part of their energy policy decisions. Can you elucidate on energy justice and its effectiveness on climate change mitigation and justice for local populations? Thank
you. There have been, I think the example of Sri Lanka, basically when we look at energy, we look at the Middle East. The woman I was talking about, Ursula or Salt Spring, has done some work on energy. And what the energy has shown that most states follow as part of climate change is that if you have energy, like for example from the sun or the air or the wind, the emission footprints become less. And if emission footprints become less, then you get points for that. And that is something which the government of India has been following. They have been bringing about rural energy. Now, what is its impact upon women when you change the whole system, modus operandi of energy? I remember at one time when we were talking about rural women using wood or using cow dung, should the cow dung go for fuel or should it go for the farming? Now, these are small issues for us, but for the people on the ground, it does take an important issue. And in the Middle East, the energy issues that are there, we still have to keep up with there. There are a lot of ways of creating new energy sources, but it's still not enough. It's too little. And there is also an emerging worry among those who are using solar energy that will in fact impact climate in the long run. So, no one knows, climate change has been science and it has been economy, not gender. But we still do not know enough science to know what is the impact of these kind of changes to the new energies, what impact it have on the global climate. We are doing it because we feel that it is good, but in the long term, no one knows. And there is still, research is still at a very nascent stage. What do you think of the energy system?
Rajapandian, the question is partly back to you and anyone else.
Yeah. I can give two readings, Swarna, on securitization. I just remembered. One is, of course, the Ursula or Salt Spring writes on securitization. She does also on human rights. She's an extraordinary writer who, from the University of Mexico, who ranges from the north to the south. So she doesn't leave the southern countries out. The other is Busan and the Copenhagen group, which worked on securitization, which brought in the issue. But
do you want to put their names into the chat, Asha?
Yeah, I'll do that. Because it's not, when Busan and the Copenhagen group worked on it, it was not gendered. So, what impact it would have on gender was something that was not there. But Spring herself uses the term. She says, I don't like the term, but still it's something that we are still looking for.
We have a question from Vishrut Agarwal. Vishrut, good to see you here. Ashaji, due to climate change, a lot of villages are being displaced, and the government is providing rehabilitation and compensation for the villagers, but that is delayed and not even provided properly. Could you please elaborate about this?
I just gave an example of my own working with climate change displaced people in the Mahanadi Delta, where there are two ways of doing that. One is that either people move, because it's a forced migration. It's migration that no one picks your hand and tells you, okay, you're going to get remittances. You have to move. So it's a forced migration. There are colonies of forced migration where they're not recognized by the government. So there is no water, there is no electricity. People have very little livelihood. The other is, as I said, relocation by the state, or by it could be private parties also, where again the compensation they give is so limited. In Satpaya, for example, though there was relocation, I think, of 60 or 70 families, it's been going on for nearly a decade. The houses are still not complete. People are not willing to leave that coastal eroded zone, though it is very dangerous, because they have cattle there. They have at least a house to live in, a shed. So, the policies on climate change relocation are still very, very poor. It is something that are still not, the National Action Plan. If you look at India's National Action Plan, which gives you all this, is still the implementation, as we said in the beginning, between what policy says and what is really done is not there. In Odisha, we have the National Action Plan, we have the Odisha State Action Plan, we have a state cell, we have a group of experts, but still, it has not taken the difference between policy and implementation is so big. And the last time I went to the relocation, one of the relocation colonies, the women had brought the goddess to make a temple there. They said maybe if the goddess comes here, the houses might get completed, because the houses were not being completed.
Would others like to say something, ask something?
I think we've cut it, enough in depth at the moment for people to think about it. It's something new, but at the same time, we are living there. It's all around us. It might be new internationally in our academia, but we live.
We live this, yes.
You talk about Chennai was hotter, or it was colder, or it was, 20 years down the line. These are, when you do participative research, these are the questions you ask. Do you remember how it was?
Can I say a few words?
Please.
Okay.
Just unmute, and I can't see who you are, so introduce yourself.
I'm Madhumita Das. Can you see me?
Not yet.
Asha, madam?
Yes. Please do speak.
Okay. So I was listening to the wonderful discussions. Let me introduce that I belong to the field of geology, which deals with the climate change from physical aspects. We are dealing with physical environment, but I am also closely associated with the gender studies. So when we look at gender and climate change, we have learned a lesson from this recent pandemic COVID-19 that we must understand how connected the entire world is. So whenever we discuss something, it should be in a global level, And also it should, just now Asha madam told that many a times people think that climate change is only a physical thing, but nobody talks about gender and climate change. What I mean to say, from ancient times, we have used the solar energy for making papad, badi, achar. So this sort of thing, that science is involved in conservation of energy. So when we are talking about the physical things, yes, climate is changing and we see the changes. The sea level is rising, the glaciers have started melting in a rigorous way, and we know that the hurricanes, the natural disasters will be exponentially increasing. But the need of the hour, I think, we should awaken the women. Because I remember once Jawaharlal told, if you want to awaken the people, you should awaken women. And when the women are on the move, the village moves, the society moves, and the nation moves. So unless and until there is a drastic awareness program to make the women conscious about climate change and also the conservation of resources. We know that waste management and conservation of resources, be it water, be it electricity, be it forest, all the resources can be best managed, best protected, best conserved by women. So whenever any policy, any movement or anything is going on, so the women involvement is a must, and we must also see that how the climate change can be tackled. Because if I talk from a geological point of view, climate change is a physical phenomenon. It's a geological phenomenon. It has happened in the past many a times. There were 5 major mass extinctions. The last one was 65 million years when the dinosaurs were extinct from the earth. So we are also anticipating the 6th mass extinction, and most probably we the humans are responsible for this. So it is high time we should all be conscious to take care of our resources, our environment, and also our biodiversity. Small things. We should save water. We should take, while going to the shops, we should take our carry bags, and these we should have a polythene free world, and that depends on the women only, because we manage the household. And if we are not conscious, then I think the 6th mass extinction will come sooner or after. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you for being here. But I want to respond to you with two provocations. One is the idea that it is only up to the women. Now, that's a very unfair burden. We already talk about how self-help groups, mobilization put an additional work burden on women who already have a lot of work. So to say that only women are responsible or mainly women are responsible seems a little bit unfair to me. But the second provocation I want to say is that to come back to this idea of securitization, and you can see clearly what my own origins are. When we talk about gender and securitization, one of the things that will happen is that this category of humans that you are giving so much responsibility to for averting climate change or turning back climate change or delaying climate change and extinction will actually get moved out of decision making, because one of the things that the security sector does is that it marginalizes non-male voices. So then we will only be picking up plastic. We will not have a say in resource allocation. We will not have a say in where will factories be put up, which lands will be acquired, etc. So this is, for me, the interesting thing about this topic that Dr. Hans has talked about is really that it juxtaposes 3 very important dilemmas for us. Or not dilemmas, but 3 things that don't seem to go together. You solve climate change, what happens to gender? You solve gender, what happens to security? seems to be all mutually inimical. So I feel like that is the core tension in this topic. And we can either include women or we can exclude women. And after that, I will now leave it to you and Asha and anyone else to respond.
I'll give you one statistics. Every government goes to the conference of parties, where at the UNFCCC, the discussions on climate change are organized. So Amrita and I started to do, a study on governance and see how many women really were there. And shamefully, India had 2% women who were represented at the UNFCCC. This is despite the fact that many of the people who are there are from the Indian Foreign Service, where there are so many women. So, the fact is that what is there and what happens in reality, the change comes. So to have no women on the board, when you have so many women at the grassroots, civil society, you have women in the Foreign Service, NIS, but when you go to Copenhagen, or you go to Paris, or you go now to Edinburgh, 2 out of 100 only women you take. So, this kind of marginalization is something that I think we've been fighting for so long. And this is something that still needs our very deep attention, that if we have climate change at the grassroots level, at the indigenous women's level, it is they who are protecting the climate change. But when it comes to the international community deciding our future and what we should do and what we should not do, what kind of action we should take, then the women are completely out. Very, very, very few. And that is why I'm very, we were all surprised, but at the same time, it's great to see the very, very young people who are going to the UN, who are going across the globe and talking about climate change and what it is doing. So that is what we need. We need many more people who are affected to come out and speak out. And we have to make those, the conduits for that. We have to make that sure also. See that, or rather ensure that those voices are not left out. We cannot do much, but that is something that we can look at and say in our writings or in our thinking, that they're not left out. Okay, Sarna.
Has anyone else been waiting to ask or speak? All right, then we will wrap up. And thank you so much for doing this, Asha. It's always a pleasure to have you with us and to work with you. And I'm so glad we also got to do this, because we're always organizing things where we listen to other people. So I'm really glad that I was able to prevail upon you to make this presentation. And I look forward to reading it when you publish it. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you who are here. Do keep coming back. Second Saturday every month, same time, same place.